What is up, everybody? Luke Film Boss here, and today I'm going to be reviewing Guardians of the Galaxy. Just how Captain America the Winter Soldier is the best MCU film, in my opinion, besides Infinity War, Guardians of the Galaxy is my favorite MCU film besides Infinity War. Guardians of the Galaxy had so much writing on its back when it was released in 2014, and it had so much pressure behind it, despite the fact that it was literally a movie containing a bunch of C-list characters that really nobody knew about at the time. And yet the movie pulled it off with one of Marvel's most massive success stories. And there's a bunch of reasons for that, but just thinking how important this movie was to the continuation of the franchise, um, especially the whole Infinity Saga section. Guardians of the Galaxy was like the cornerstone, the building block for basically all of this stuff. Like we had been introduced to Infinity Stones before, like the Mind Stone and the Space Stone and the Ether, which is the Reality Stone, but we didn't really know what the Infinity Stones were. Guardians of the Galaxy is the film that officially explains to us what the Infinity Stones are, what their purpose is, what their power is, why they're such a big deal, and why so many people in the galaxy, like Thanos, want these Infinity Stones. And this was the first time we actually see Thanos' goal of trying to get the Infinity Stones. Like, that's pretty much what Ronin's job was to do in this movie, was to get the Power Stone for Thanos, and then Ronin double crosses Thanos and uses the Power Stone for himself. And Thanos is in this movie. This movie had to introduce Thanos in a meaningful way. It was basically Thanos' first um, real introduction to the MCU, and that's a big deal. So there's so many things going on. We have the Nova, we have the Kree, and then there's so many characters such as Nebula, Ronin, Thanos, Yondu, all of the Ravengers. We have Rocket, Groot, Drax, Gamora, Peter Quill. This movie just had to balance so much, and while also doing it by making this by far the funniest, probably the most comedic MCU film that had ever come out at the time, and in my opinion is still the funniest MCU film to date. And yet it never loses sight of the seriousness and the gravity of the whole story and the real emotional core with each of the characters. And each of these characters have some sort of traumatic backstory. You have Drax lost his wife and his kid. You have Rocket, he's a mutation that was ripped apart, well, not ripped apart, but like dissected and restructured over and over again, as he says in the movie. That's traumatic. Peter Quill watched his mom die of cancer as a kid, and then directly after was abducted by aliens who didn't really treat him all that well. And then you have Gamora was taken from her planet. Her planet was basically destroyed by Thanos, like as we see in Infinity War later, that it was half of her planet was killed, and she was taken from her home to be basically manufactured into a warrior weapon for Thanos. So each of them have these tragic backstories, and one thing that they're all lacking is a family. They've all either lost their family or never had a family to begin with. And you have Groot, who's pretty much this outcast. He doesn't have any place that he belongs. There's pretty much nobody in the galaxy like him, at least not that we've seen so far. Now, maybe in Guardians 3, we'll see that there are more Groots or something. But basically, Groot is just all by himself, and Rocket was the only one he had. And yet, we're just able to see that despite all of their differences and their trauma, they were all able to come together and put aside their differences and realizing that they could find family outside of their family, if that makes sense. Like, they were able to find a new family. And it's just very heartwarming, very emotional. and they definitely act like a family, and that's why most of the comedy works, and why this movie is able to take so many characters and effectively develop them without having to like give every single character their own movie like the Avengers did, is because the Guardians are so special and work so well because they have that sense of family together. They all work off of each other, which is what makes this movie so entertaining. Now, as far as the comedy goes, I think the comedy definitely works in this movie's favor, mostly because the movie doesn't focus on the comedy all the time. Like, there's so many moments where the comedy just comes in, and yet it doesn't take you out of the experience. It's so well written that it's able to work effectively as a dramatic comedy. From the very first scene, we just see Peter Quill watch his mom die and get abducted by aliens. Like, that is so bizarre. And that happens before the Marvel title even rolls. It's like Marvel had never done something this ambitious before, and it James Gunn and the crew and the cast pulled it off perfectly. And Ronan as a villain, he's very one dimensional. He's not the best, like, he's not a great villain, but just due to his connection to the Kree, which is somewhat interesting, and the fact that he actually does have a motivation. While we don't really see much of his backstory, we don't see any of his backstory. We just hear it um, through dialogue that his father and his father's father were killed by the Nova, and that's why he wants to kill and destroy the Nova. It's it's not super deep for like the villain because we don't really see too much of him. But the movie does a good job, better than most Marvel films, by giving us at least something to grasp onto with with Ronan as a villain. And he's powerful, like one of the most powerful villains we've seen. He's able to wield an Infinity Stone. So that just made the movie a little more fun because he has so many different connections. Like he has connections to Thanos, to Gamora, to Nebula, and then he has this giant spaceship, like, which makes him seem like a real threat, despite the fact that he character wise might be like a one note villain. He's at least entertaining to watch. He's just like this powerful overlord kind of guy, which works better than like it did in Thor the Dark World. Mostly because Ronan actually does have at least personality and an understandable, realistic motivation. But overall, the movie is just amazing. It balances emotion and heart and characters and humor all also well. And I think that's because, like most Marvel movies used to do, it focuses on the characters, and all of the jokes, all of the emotion comes straight from the characters. It's not coming randomly from an external force or external party that's trying to force a laugh. It's just natural. That's how well this movie was written. Quite frankly, while I think this movie was the foundation for how great Phase 3 was, especially how great the Infinity Saga section was, this movie also has kind of led to the downfall of the MCU because while this movie was perfectly worked the humor in with the drama, I think Marvel just saw it as, oh, we make movies funnier and more zany and more just wacky. Somehow that's going to bring in the dollars and somehow that's going to make the movie better, but they kind of didn't realize that it was the cleverness and the tone just worked perfectly for Guardians, whereas it doesn't really work with a film like Black Widow or Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And so I think that this over saturation of Marvel with jokes and cheesy one-liners and all this stuff has kind of led to the downfall of Marvel. And even that wouldn't be too bad if Marvel was at least writing a consistent story. But once again, they've lost sight of actually writing good characters and they're just trying to throw in random jokes, whether or not they actually fit for the characters that they're written for. And it might not be Guardians of the Galaxy's fault, but quite frankly, I think that that is where the problem originated. Not that the Guardians films are by any means bad films. They are great. They are some of Marvel's best films, especially this first one. But I think Marvel saw that success and misunderstood why it was successful. It's because there was real heart, real characters in this movie. And that's why Guardians of the Galaxy, in my opinion, is one of the best and definitely my favorite MCU film besides Infinity War. Thank you all for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell to help you be on the lookout for more videos from Luke Film Boss.